Well, good to see everybody. So this seminar is about building earned income, but it's particularly about the marketing and sales sides of that, and most particularly about the sales side. So how to sell ethically and professionally and highly profitably in a non-profit environment. And from my perspective, learning to sell really well, particularly at the higher value end, it's something which is really important for charities. It's something that it's really difficult to learn from a book, because it's kind of like skiing or cycling. It's sort of partly behavioural and partly mindset. So it's much easier to learn it by practicing it, having a coach or an expert, or having a group around you who can feed back and observe. Sales skills are probably, in this 8 years I've been advising charities, they're probably the single most misunderstood and undervalued discipline in the sector, particularly around commercial income, but more generally in terms of selling ideas. And I think a big part of the reason for that is that we don't know what we don't know. So unless we know what good looks like around this sort of stuff, we don't know how far away we are from it. And so what I'm going to do this evening, I'm going to give you an overview so that you can judge for yourself what you know, what you don't know, to what extent you and your colleagues would actually benefit from knowing a lot more about this stuff and becoming a lot more confident in it, in terms of particularly around effective ethical selling. So I've put a question, or set of 3 questions, just for you to mull over. You don't have to share your answers. It's just, for you. Who are your ideal buyers? What is the value that they receive, and what return does that provide on their investment? And as I step through, hopefully I'll give you some food for thought. So this is just a very simple way of looking at the stuff that we sell, whether that's training courses, whether that's products, whether that's advice, whether that's services, whatever it is. That if you look on the left-hand side, there's that sort of range from commodity to bespoke. So is something just a basic standard off-the-shelf kind of product, or is it something which is highly bespoke and customized? And generally the value that you'll get for these things is in proportion to how little of a commodity this is. So it's to do with the value that the customer receives and the scarcity of that, and also combined with your confidence in being able to put out price out there and stick with it. And the reason that I'm starting with this is because so many times I see in the non-profit sector, and just take this as a generalization, and there are always exceptions to it, that we price based on how much stuff costs, when we should really be pricing based on how much the value is to the recipient of that value. And it's just a default that we go into, because those two things can be dramatically different. They can be different for the same thing for 2 different buyers. They can be worth far more to one buyer than to another. They can be worth far more even to the same buyer before and after a single conversation. And it's one thing to understand that intellectually, but it's another thing to really get your head around that and to really understand what that therefore means for your sales process, because the difference in how much money you'll make is huge. So the example that I might give is, say for instance, if somebody wants to have a new kitchen, you can sell them the kit, you can sell them the shelves and the cabinets and all the standard stuff. That's your kind of commodity. It's low value stuff. There's a lot of competition in that marketplace, and there's not a lot of money to be made. You can sell them a service whereby you install them a kitchen and maybe custom make certain parts of it in order to fit around the weird angles that you happen to have, and the chimney that shouldn't have been removed years ago and still there, all that kind of stuff. And that's in that sort of middle value space. Or you can help them understand how to create an environment in that space that is ideal for them. And to do that, you need to understand an awful lot more about what they want from this sort of stuff. It's not about offering products, it's about asking questions. And I see, a number of people nodding. This is sort of fairly elementary stuff, but it's really important in terms of understanding how you sell stuff and how you make money from that commercial side of your income. It's about moving from a transactional relationship whereby you do a load of marketing, somebody comes to you, they click on something on your website, or they phone you up and they book a place on a course or whatever it is, that they transact with you, from something that is, pre-designed, off the peg, right through to the, having more added value in terms of, we suggest this, we suggest that, this goes really well with that, etc. The sort of thing that you would get in a retail environment, if it's a really good retail environment, through to the sort of solution. If you're If you're going into an electronics expertise shop like Maplin's or something like that, they will quite often ask, what are you trying to build with this? Okay, so there's a better way of doing that. You want to do this, you want to do that. These are the kind of components. This is the stuff to watch out for. Right through to the kind of inspiration level of, I suppose my kids are late teenage years, so Games Workshop is the retail example of this, where you go into a Games Workshop and it's like walking into a cult. The people that there love this stuff, and they embrace you and they talk you through it, and they want to inspire you with what you can do and how you can. They're less interested in selling than they are in inspiring you with the concept of stuff. And it's the same with business to business when you're selling to commissioners, or whether you're selling to retail businesses or whatever kind of businesses you're selling to. The point of a good sales process, this is where the value gets really unlocked, is because you'll see this a lot with people that come to you as a charity and they know what they want. They want you to deliver a service, or they want you to give them a bit of training, or they want you to give them advice. They've got a very clear idea of what they want. And when I've got two kids on the spectrum. The eldest one is now 16. He's just about to turn 17, and he was diagnosed when he was 6 with Asperger's. And we were very clear when we first went to CAMS. What we wanted was for these lovely CAMS people to kind of take him and do some stuff with him and solve a load of these problems. And what they knew that we needed was somebody to sit down with us and educate us on him and educate us on autism and Asperger's and understanding all of that. That's not what we wanted, but that they knew that that's what we needed because they got a load of expertise there. So what getting past the wants into the needs is about getting through that filter of expectations that people have about what it is that they want, based on what they've seen elsewhere, what other people have told them. Well, it's probably a course because I'm an HR person and my boss has asked me to see if I can fix this problem, and that's what HR people do. We buy courses, so that's what I'm looking for. So there's a whole set of filters of expectations in people's heads that they go through in order to translate the needs that they understand into wants that they'll articulate to you. And you have to get past that as an organisation to really understand their needs, and beyond that, to really understand their ambitions, because there's a limit to how well they will understand their own needs. This was the case with us as parents, that your expertise is about helping them go back beyond that and trying to find out, what do you want this for? What are you trying to achieve? What is the goal for you? And inspire them to think differently about that. So all of that requires a deeper understanding relationship, which you can build very, very quickly with the right skills in the right context, using the right language and the right behaviours. And this is the kind of skills that your organisation generally, if you're working in this commercial space, particularly if you're working in businesses, would massively benefit from developing, but very few organisations develop. It's a bit of a soapbox you'll imagine here. And it's really important to, one final thing, and then I'll come back and I'll drop these slides and we'll see each other again. But one final thing is the confusion between sales and marketing as well, that I see an awful lot in non-profit organisations. And I'll just give you an example of that where we get confused is between the kind of what I would call the retail space, where we're selling a low value stuff to a broad audience. And generally the approach to that, the right approach to that, is you do your broadcast marketing, you're on Twitter, you're on your social media, you're putting stuff in flyers and magazines and whatever it is, you're sort of advertising heavily. And behind that there is largely a retail selling model, because you're describing the product, the functionality. The marketing is doing all the hard work. It's doing what classically would be called the sort of AIDA steps. It's raising awareness, it's creating interest, it's prompting desire, and it's sort of triggering some form of action in people. So the marketing is doing the heavy lifting, and that's appropriate when it's low value because you can't invest a huge amount in that interface. But for high value, it's not. For high value, the purpose of marketing is purely to get somebody to have a conversation with you. It's purely to make you an object of interest for them to talk to. And an awful lot of organisations, both in the private sector as well as in the third sector, when you're talking about high value sales, they will default to the kind of marketing that works for retail. So for example, you will go to a conference, but you will take a stand at the conference. As opposed to being on the stage, you'll be behind a table giving people out leaflets. You might as well be doing that cold calling or emailing. That's a retail model for a high value consultative style. And this is the thing that I have to try and spend a little bit of time with people getting across, is The purpose of marketing is different depending on where you are in that value equation, how your proposition works, and therefore the purpose of sales is different, and the two will interface in a different way. So this is really important when, I'll make it real for you. If, for example, you support people who are carers. So 10% of the UK's population at some point, well, right now, 10% of the UK's population is caring for somebody else. And a huge portion of those are in work. So employers have a real challenge when people who are caring for somebody run into those sort of crisis periods that we all run into, where everything kind of goes wrong and your time is really diverted away from work. And a lot of people struggle to hold down jobs during those difficult periods because employers don't understand how to flex to the needs of carers. So so if you're a charity that works with carers, then one of the things you want to do is help employers provide flexibility during that space. Now, there are different levels that you can do this at. You can sell a training course to HR, and they will pay you, £1,000 or something to put a team on a training course. Or you can talk to an operations director about the level of turnover of staff, and if they employ 10,000 people, that's millions of pounds of value. The value equation is completely different for effectively the same thing, for your expertise in helping them solve this problem. Or you can talk to them about, for instance, this might be about, expertise might be about sight loss, for instance, or in disability, in which case, they may want to come to you to help with their employment practices and to help them get more accessible buildings, etc. But you can talk to them, you can inspire them about what they could do for customers and those sort of things. And each one of those, you'll be talking to a different buyer within the same organisation, but you're probably providing an awful lot of the same stuff. But those people will value it completely differently. So the equation in a buyer's head depends on the value that they perceive. But that's why the questions that I popped in the chat earlier about, for your highest value commercial opportunities, who are your ideal buyers and what is the value that they receive and what return does that provide on their investment? They are critical questions, and they're questions that you need to keep asking yourself, because the obvious answers are not necessarily the right answers. Are you targeting the buyers who have the greatest potential value to gain from your services, or are you targeting the ones who are easiest to reach with a commodity in mind that you can sell them? So we think about the people that are easy to get to. If you're business customers, it's the HR teams or the CSR teams. Those people, they don't have a great deal of budget, but they're really accessible for charities because they want to talk to you. They also think that you're cheap and you can do something great for them for very little. But the marketing teams are where the money is. If you're doing CSR, blending it with their marketing work, the kind of things that Lacoste did with the IUCN, the International Union, I think, for nature, conservation of nature. That's straight out of their marketing budgets, and it's far more powerful and it's far more lucrative for you guys if you can get into the right parts of the right organisations and really understand who the right buyers are, who will gain the most from your organisations. So I'm just going to pause there for a second while you reflect on those questions.
Martin, if I may.
You may, Richard, of course, please.
Thank you. When I was with NCVO, not very long ago, but it's going back some time, if this will make you smile, we launched a program called Step on Board. We were very lucky. We had a 6-figure contract with Barclays, and the idea was that we would help people to become trustees. And we began to show that there was a 3-way positive thing, a positive for the individual, positive for the organisation, and positive, obviously, for the charities, if the people were given the right sort of background so they can come in as good trustees. And we did what you said. We chose people that we knew, but we quickly recognised that we needed to get to, in this case, HR, ironically. And they did have budgets because it was all about senior people. But my story, which would make you smile, is that I sat with somebody from Jaguar Land Rover, and she said to me, well, how much does this cost? And I said, £2,500, and that was £2,500 for an introductory program, and then placing people or trying to place people. We didn't guarantee we'd place them later on. And she said, what, per person? And I sat there and thought, oh God, we really got this price wrong, because she was looking at a very senior cohort within the business. Actually, our experience prior to that had been with a relatively less senior. They were directors, but not the senior people in the cohort. So your point, I sat there and thought, oh God, I should have priced this at £14,500 or whatever, or £20,000. And I'd gone in at 2.5. We were still doing well, man. We were making 36% margin, but that wasn't the point. It was your illustration there. It was a real factual illustration. We had gone away from cost only. We'd looked at it as a basis of saying, we make a proper profit. But it was still, we had still misunderstood the market, and it took a little while to get that right. And I'm not sure we've still managed to actually pitch it the right person in the right place in organisations who are very interested, because we've proven that it has very positive benefit. Anyway, that's my little anecdotal story for you.
Just for the benefit of everybody else on the call, the correct answer to that question, £2,500 per person, is yes, £2,500 per person per month.
Yeah, I know, but I couldn't, because they knew what we were charging other people. Don't you? I do understand. I did afterwards think I should have said yes, but I just felt I couldn't, because it would have been so inequitable in terms of how I was dealing with the rest of the market.
Yes, on that. So what about other people? I mean, what's your experience of doing that, kind of charging for value and understanding the value and finding buyers who are going to most value the kind of work that you can do for them? Darren.
Hi Martin, hi everyone. So I guess, so I'm from the Conservation Volunteers. We do, our biggest income area of growth at the moment is corporate income. And the vast majority of that is for delivering employee volunteering. So teams of employees from private organisations coming along to spend a team building day doing something positive for the local environment, for the local community. And for many years, we were getting inundated with queries from companies that were interested in this sort of thing. And the moment we mentioned there was a cost involved, they'd hang up the phone and walk away. So for many years, we ended up underpricing this in order to get as many of them to stop hanging up the phone as possible. Until, at one point, I can't remember which organisation it was, but we had a conversation with them where it was clear just how much they valued all the different outcomes which would be associated with this sort of programme. And we went from charging a tenner a head up to about 100 quid a head. So it was a step change. Therefore, after that, we no longer had to persuade all these tiny little, these other companies that wanted it on the cheap. We could actually go out and think, right, who else is going to value this similarly, and try and build up the customer base that way.
Yeah, I think that's a classic example. When I work with people on the sales side of things, what invariably comes up is rethinking the proposition in terms of the outcomes and the value that's received, and how that value translates into either organisational value or business value outcomes for individuals, for their constituency, depending on the what is a priority for that particular buyer. And I think you're right that your experience is bang on. As soon as you start to get into the so what are the implications of this? How does that benefit you as an organisation? What are the outcomes that you want to achieve from this? All of a sudden the conversation is much higher value. The challenge is that you rarely get that conversation to happen with somebody who's been tasked with finding a team building exercise, because they've been given the job, let's go and find a team building exercise, and they have no more scope for the conversation than that, apart from I've been told. So the art is to use those kind of gatekeeper people to help them get them to help you get an introduction to the people who actually own the business outcomes, so that you can have a conversation with them about what they want. David.
We had developed over a number of years our own software solution for our keeping all our data about all the children and families we supported. For various reasons which were well beyond my IT ability, we needed to ditch that because everything it was built on was out of date. We went out and looked at the market, and there was nothing there of the same ability, because it's a very small market, to be honest, and it's a very complex market because we support children with a whole range of different conditions. And after a lot of debate, we actually decided that our best option was a high-risk option, but to invest in it ourselves and completely rebuild the system, which we did. Cost a lot of money. We got some funding for it. And then we had the fascinating exercise of trying to sell it to our colleague hospices around the country. We thought we had a very high-value product because no one else had anything available that could do the same sophistication. But we invested a lot of money in this, and we tried to put what we had thought was a premium price. And it's more about experience. I'm reflecting that trying to sell something to people we knew well and were working alongside in other ways at a price that they thought was, in some cases, extortionate. We tried to explain why it was much higher than buying something that had 10% of the capacity, but might, also was 10% of the cost. So I've just been reflecting really, Martin, my experience.
One of the things when because you know somebody quite well, it's often feels a little bit awkward entering into the conversations in that right way. But I mean, I'll talk about how you have the conversations in a bit. We'll spend a bit of time on it if that's where we want to go. But opening up people to talk to you about the challenges that they have right now. So where your solution can help them, and your solution can help them. There's one thing. It's one thing for you to be able to explain how your solution can help them, but it's another thing entirely for them to get them to explain to you how your solution can help them. So one triggers the defensiveness, the other drives an engagement. So it creates a confirmation bias in their minds because they're starting to explain to you about why this would be valuable for them. So the key is to ask questions, but it's that it might feel a bit awkward for you because kind of know the answer to the questions and it feels as though you're doing a bit of a role play. But that will be a rare situation for most of us. Most of us, we're going to people that aren't close friends, and we're able to get permission to ask these kind of questions quite simply. That they ask you, what is it that you guys do? Tell me a little bit about your organisation. And the standard response to that is, well, we do an awful lot of things. It's going to be easy for me to narrow it down, actually, if you don't mind, if I can just ask a couple of questions about your organisation and the challenges that you've got, and then I can talk about the things that we do that are most relevant. Is that okay? And nobody's going to say no to that. Straight away, you've got permission then to start asking them about their challenges. And from there, you guide the conversation through to the challenges that you sense are going to be the big ones where you have a solution to offer to them. But you'll be guided by you, but it'll also be shaped by the person about what challenges they talk about. And the questions you will ask will be stuff around, what are the implications of that? What's the downstream problem? If we can't get that fixed, what are the implications of that? And what would ideal look like? What would brilliant look like to you? Talk to me about that, and talk to me what benefits that would have for your organisation. What would that mean for you and your team? What would that mean for your trustees? What would that mean for your beneficiaries? And all of those things then create a much stronger value conversation, not least because they're telling you this. You're not telling them, they're telling you. And there's a huge difference in the emotional commitment that drives. But we can go on to that later. And I appreciate it is more difficult when you know people well to structure a conversation like that, because it does feel a little bit stilted.
Sorry, not Martin, not a question, more a comment. Because I actually think, when you're talking about kind of commercial value opportunities and how you drive the best value for your organisation, in many instances we need to think of our customer as someone different than we do today. We work with disabled people, and yes, they are beneficiaries of the work that we do. But if we continue to think of them as our direct customer in terms of, let's look using getting disabled people into work as one kind of example, we'll continue to support small groups of people and make a small difference. But if we start to think of our customer differently as organisations, as employers, and I think we start to change the value when you talk about CSR and the business case for employing disabled people and all of those things, I think you start to create a different value proposition and a different mindset in the way in which you kind of approach things as well.
Exactly. I couldn't have put it better. I'm going to update the questions in the chat, which I've just done. So the question is, who could your ideal buyers be? And you will know this from your own work that, sometimes it's easier to go in there with an acquired disability slant. So, you spent all this money training these people and developing, their skills and their capabilities and their knowledge, etc. over the last 10 years. If somebody acquires a disability, if they start to lose their sight, or if they, if they get injured in an accident, etc., all of a sudden you're going to lose all that. So that's one, there's a much more tangible, immediate thing. But then, you've got the whole kind of statistical basis around the non-working disabled population who have all these skills, and there's a whole kind of loyalty card there. There's all of this stuff, isn't there? And then the accessibility for customers, and potentially, it's exactly the chart that I was showing earlier about, what is the value case, and it's different for different people within the same organisation, but you can help them with all of those things, often with the same stuff. But you can price it differently because you can package it as a bespoke solution for each individual organisation. And we don't get yourself tied up in the knots that Richard ended up with. And people know what our pricing is. It's fairly flat. It's the same for everybody, because we've created a product, and we're marketing a product, which is this, as opposed to we're marketing a solution for your executives to get great expertise out of working with charities, to understand how boards work, to understand different sides of things, to play into your CSR mission. All that value you will get from us, and we'll create a tailored solution for your business to do all of this for, which we can just make up a price out of the top of our heads for, because you'll pay it, because you think it's worth it by now. So Darren kind of opened this conversation. For me, it's under the banner of being an object of interest. It's about being defined not by what you do, but by the difference that you make. It's by those outcomes. And are you able to give them examples when you're having the conversations that, we've worked with 2 or 3 organisations a bit like yours, and the things that they get out of this A, B, C and D. And these are the kind of things that they've told us this is the impact that it's had on the culture, on the morale, on the productivity, on their engagement with the staff. Those kind of things. So that's your value proposition, and that's a really important thing. And it's driven out of understanding who your ideal buyer is. So which are the organisations that will benefit most from that value proposition? What needs to be their situation in order for, so you're kind of able to qualify buyers very, very quickly. Do you fit this profile? And therefore, are you worth spending a huge amount of my time with? And who in the organisation would actually make the decision? And whose budget would it come out of? And these are, they sound quite sort of brutal questions in a sense. Who pays for this? But that's a really important question to ask, because otherwise you will spend hours talking to the wrong people. And actually, if you find the right language and ask it in the right way, most people will answer it relatively straightforwardly. That I just need to understand which budget does this come out with, because I'll just need to check with that person that we're going to give them what they want. It's an ethical responsibility for me to speak to the budget holder before we agree to go forward. Those are the kind of pieces of language that are very, very effective in helping you meet the right buyer and have the right conversations with them. This is if you've read the book, you'll have seen this, because this is, I think, at the start of the chapter that's about sales. But this is what I use as the sales cycle. So you're looking at the kind of the marketing and the referrals and intros, all those mechanisms to help you reach your ideal buyers. That's step 1. Step 2 is then to actually get to meet them with, whether that's virtually or on telephone or whatever, even in person, and to get that permission to start asking them questions, so that you can start to understand what their real needs are and what their real aspirations are in the space where you can provide some kind of help. Through there, the conversation is about moving them to a place of conceptual agreement, where you and they both agree what it is that they want to change, how they want it to change it, and that you are the right people to do that. And then you walk away. And sometimes people will then try and turn that into some kind of a tender process. You particularly get this in public services. But if you've done your job really well in creating conceptual agreement around something which is really custom, really bespoke, really demonstrates your understanding of their challenges and your expertise around solving them, it's very rare that any sort of competitive tender is successful for anybody else. You've usually got it. That's the kind of rule of thumb, isn't it, with tenders? If the first time you hear about them is at the tender process, you've already lost, because somebody else has done this process properly. There are a number of different techniques, and I talked before about the mindset. These are the kind of behaviours and the techniques for moving through these different stages. So in terms of reaching out and drawing in, whether it's through referrals and introductions or whether it's through targeted marketing, there are it's cold calling doesn't work. Social media rarely works. But there are much more understood ways of doing this. Establishing yourself as an object of interest, the thing that I was just talking about how you do that, how you use language to create interest, how you break the ice, how you build rapid relationships, and how you use kind of guiding questions. I'll talk a little bit more about that bit, because that's probably the bit that most people struggle the most to adjust to. I think again, it's one of those preconceptions around sales that selling is about talking to people and you talking people into something, when actually most of the feedback that I get, Sharon Allen did a great video on this actually when I trained her team. At the end of that, she said the most important thing that I learned was to just ask a question and then shut up. She said she actually put her fingers on her lips when she said it. And it is true that the art of sort of high value selling is about asking questions and really starting to understand the individual and the solutions that will work for them. So I'll talk a little bit about those questions in a second. And then the 3 C's, basically what you need to build in order to get conceptual agreement. I'll give you an example of that as well. So that's all in the book. If you want more on that, you can pick up a copy or just email me and I'll post you out a copy. So here's the key thing. So from a conceptual point of view, meeting with somebody, you will talk to them about their situation. That's the point. Trying to understand what is the situation, what are the issues that they're facing, what are the things that they want to solve. Now, the wrong way to do this is to, they talk about a problem and you say, okay, so we can solve that. Because there's very little value in helping people solve an immediate problem with a tactical fix. There's little value for them and there's little value consequently for you, because nobody's going to pay you a great deal for delivering them very little value. So hence the questions around what would an ideal situation look like? And this is a really important part of this sort of value conversation. This is the difference between your sort of transactional retail selling and your more consultative sort of invested selling. And it's those kind of questions about what would ideal like if I give you a magic wand that could change one thing, what would that be? What would perfect look like? What would be something that would be transformational for your beneficiaries or for your organisation or for your team or for whatever it is? Those are the kind of questions that you should be primed with going in there, because those are the ones that unlock a much higher value opportunity for you to not just fix a problem, but get them to a far better situation. And then there's these further rounds of questions around the implications. So if we don't fix this, what's likely to happen and what are the implications of that? And you can't ask these questions too many times. What are the implications of not fixing? So for instance, if we went back to the carers thing, if you can't fix that problem, you will continue to lose money and you will continue to lose talent and you will continue to have to completely invest. And somebody else may solve this problem and they will attract all of that talent. But what is the impact if you get this right? There's an impact on loyalty, there's an impact on morale, there's an impact enormously from people not seeing their colleagues being ground into the dust almost with stress and trying to manage all of these things. And all of these things are things that you can prompt, but these are things that the other person needs to be coached to think through. This is about helping the buyer really understand what a solution could mean for them in a way that they've probably not thought it through before. And you can do this because you've got the expertise. And what therefore does that mean for X, Y, and Z? And ultimately, what does that mean for your business, for financially? And those are the things that help you set. If anybody's received any one of my proposals, you'll notice, you'll recognise these headings. So therefore, we want to move from a place where you're exposed to all of these implications, all of these downside implications from not having fixed it, to an ideal situation where you're starting to gain all of this upside to it. So our objectives should be around helping you gain that upside, helping you get those outcomes. Our measures of success should be around that. The value equation should stem from that. It should be around more customers or lower staff turnover. They should be able to put real tangible value on this. And these are the things that often people struggle with until you've practiced it. This is why this isn't the stuff that it's easy to learn from a book. It's the stuff that you have to practice, and you have to have somebody say to you, no, they didn't feel awkward when you asked that question. It felt really natural for you to say, and how does that turn into a return on investment for you guys? Because it's important for us that we create a return on investment for you, because that's what we do. So if we can't put a value to this, then we shouldn't be doing the project for you. So how much do you think it's going to pay you back? And you can then set your pricing from there. Questions around urgency. People see that and you think, well, I'm going to have to ask them how urgent it is. No, you don't. All you have to ask them is, when would you love to have this in place by? And therefore, working back, how urgent is it that we start? If you've described a really ideal solution and a great impact, people are going to talk about, well, I'd love this to be in place tomorrow. Well, the earliest we can do it is probably late December. but if we start now, we could get it by then. How does that sound? You know, these are really natural pieces of conversation if you're practiced in it, if you're well versed in it. And it's all about helping the buyer really understand the potential value that they can get from working with you on this, and from almost giving you your head, giving you permission to tell them how it should be done, as opposed to giving you a brief and saying, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. You're moving that back, you're getting back into aspirations, you're taking almost control back. So, because you're the person with the expertise, you're the person that should be able to say, well, actually, there is a better way of doing this. This is the way of doing this, and this is the approach that will give you all of these outcomes. So this is a really important conversation, and that gives you your first C, that kind of financial side of things, the measures, the objectives, the value. That gives you your first of the 3 C's. So these 3 C's, and you need to get all 3 from people, and you'll know this if you've ever kind of built a great business case and gone to a commissioner, and you know it's a really sound business case, and they tell you it's a really sound business case, but then they don't do it. And they don't do it because either they don't have confidence in you that they'll deliver it, you know, and they're worried about getting egg on their face with all their colleagues, or they're not committed emotionally because there's nothing in it for them personally. It's going to be too much hassle for me to go through all the internal hoops to get this done, even though it clearly stacks up. And you see this more in some businesses and some organisations than others, that if you don't get all those 3 C's, but through that conversation, through exactly that same conversation process, with the right language and the right level of confidence and the examples that you can trot out, not only do you achieve the case for change, but it also builds their confidence in you because you're asking really intelligent questions. You're giving great examples from other organisations that have achieved these kind of things. You're constantly building up effectively their trust, their belief in your ability to do this. By talking to them about what would the impact be and asking them about what would that mean for you, what would that mean for your team, what would that mean for your, potentially if you get to a level that you're comfortable enough in that conversation, what would that mean for your career? What would that mean for the way that your organisation is seen by its peers? These are legitimate questions that you can ask to prompt people to think in ways that will commit them emotionally to wanting to do this. Ultimately, if it's the right thing for them to do, then it's helpful for you to elicit an emotional commitment for them to do it. You're helping them by doing this. This is actually based, if you want to read backstory, if you are a kind of book learner, then spin selling is where a lot of this started, which is it's an absolute classic from the 90s. It's been developed in lots of different ways in terms of, this is consultative selling style, there's the challenger sale, there are solution selling, there's various different methodologies. This is, in my view, and probably quite a lot of experience as well, this is the right kind of style for non-profits to use because it's more ethical and it plays more to the sense that you want outcomes for somebody else as opposed to you want to deliver a sale or whatever. But there's a whole load of stuff around this. There's stuff in the book, there's other books that I can recommend, but this is the core set of skills. It's around that questioning, guiding conversation, and then once you've got that, everything else in terms of the way that you market, the way that you approach your value proposition, it shifts around understanding, that you have a really good sales model. And it's really important that whole value piece. I'll just share this one bit, and I use this a lot when I'm talking with business salespeople, kind of field salespeople, because very few of them ever understand this. So you ask them the question, what volume do you need? If you give somebody, if you offer a customer a 10% discount on your stuff, what volume do you need to actually pay that back? And you ask this to a bunch of salespeople within the commercial sector, really commercial people, and very few of them even know how to answer it. They will just look blank at you. And this is the bit where we were talking to Richard. Richard was talking about, we were doing a margins 30% and that sort of thing. If your operating margin, after all your costs, everything added in, is 30%, and you offer somebody a 10% discount, you have to deliver 50% extra volume in order to make the same amount of money. So it's more stress, it's more work, it's more headaches, it's more risk to make the same amount of money. And if you're operating more sort of 20% margins, which I'm sure many of you are, you have to deliver 100% growth if you were to offer a 10% discount. Now, I'm not sort of suggesting that you consider offering discounts. The question that I'm actually asking is, how much are you discounting already in your heads because you're a charity, because you're selling to less than ideal buyers, because you haven't got real confidence in your proposition, and because you're not going through that that process that really engages them emotionally and intellectually in the longer term value that they get from working for you, the real outcomes of this, you are leaving, presumably, significant amount of money on the table as organisations. You're heavily discounting subconsciously without realising it. And the amount of volume that you would need in order to recover that is huge, rather than just establishing the price because you understand the process. They understand the value. You're confident enough to ask for an equitable share of that. In the same way that Darren's team got to, when as soon as they started to unlock the value equation inside people's heads to really get a narrative around the outcomes that it creates, the difference, a factor of 3, 4, 5 times, was it, Darren, that you were able to charge more?
Yeah, it was. It went from a tenner a head up to 100 quid a head.
Yeah. So an order of magnitude on price. And that's not, that might sound outlandish, but you've heard a tangible example there. And in my experience, that's not unusual to be able to increase your price by a factor of 10, not a percent, not 10%, by a factor of 10. By understanding who the real buyer is, what their value equation is, what value they would really ascribe to this if they understood it properly. If they understood the implications of not doing it and the impact of doing it and of getting a really good people like yourselves to help them to do it. The value is huge. It can be a factor of 10.
And Martin, one of the interesting things there is that actually we had a product which we could sell almost in the retail model for middle managers, and directors. But what we hadn't actually twigged, and we have now, is that actually we could upsell it dramatically by understanding which element of the business we were dealing with, in terms of seniority. So these are people who might be paying £20,000-30,000 a year to send them off for an MBA. So it was just getting our heads around understanding that segmentation of the market we were dealing within organisations as well as within the broader market that we were working with.
Yeah, I mean, if some of the organisations that you're dealing with, people like Barclays, they'll probably spend $100,000 a year on plants for their head office. The idea that they don't have $100,000 to spend on developing their next cadre of board, they'll probably spend half of that on recruiting one person. So the idea that they don't have significant amount of money to invest in something like that, which is board development, it's sort of next generation board, it's succession, it's all of those things that keeps their main executives and their non-execs awake at night. Is where is our next stream of talent going to come through? How can we really expose them to all this stuff? And you're offering solutions there, which are commercially incredibly valuable for them, and they will pay for it. And particularly if you're one of the only people that can do it, and do it in a way that really understands what the organizer. If you can demonstrate you really understand what they want to get from that experience, and they can feel as though it's tailored to suit them, that they will get exactly what they need from it, and that you understand what they need, possibly more than they do. For most of these businesses where, the kind of businesses that you guys would probably be looking at, they have money. The idea that they don't have budgets, they do. They're just not allocated to this. But then nobody would allocate a budget to the kind of stuff that you're going to rock up and ask for or suggest. They don't have a load of money just squirreled away in case a non-profit comes up with a really good idea. That doesn't exist. It just means diverting it from one place to another. But the higher the ROI, is another sort of slightly provocative question that it's perfectly legitimate to ask. We've just talked about something that can deliver you a 10-time return on investment within the next 12 months. What else do you have in your portfolio that remotely compares to that? Because they won't have anything, and so therefore how can they divert money from something else to deliver this, because this will return far, far quicker. They will find the money if you've got the right buyer, if you've got somebody who's empowered to write the check and to find the money. And so finding the right buyer and connecting with them sort of rationally and emotionally with these things by asking questions and coaching them through that process, that's the key to high value selling. And that's the skill that I think, in my experience, it's just sort of taken for granted. It's not just in the third sector, it does happen in businesses as well, but there's just an assumption that if I ask somebody to go and sell something, that you'll just magically have these skills. You'll magically understand that, there's been 40, 50 years of science and development in the sales space, but none of that really matters because you're a good person and you can go out there and sell it without a whole load of training, without a whole load of development. And it's a real shame, because you could make so much more money from this. On that original kind of the good sales cycle, the next 4 sales, this is the bit as well that people massively miss. That whole transactional piece steers you away from. If you sort of embedded in that kind of retail model, they'll come to us, they'll ask us for stuff, and we'll do it. You spend so much time winning this business and investing so much energy, ideally, in getting to the right buyer and getting them involved, that it's really, really easy once you're in that position to leverage all that work and to create long-term income from that same client, same customer, by retaining them, a strong relationship, sticky propositions are the things that we talk about, getting repeat business on different things from the same person, or referrals internally or externally to different parts of a larger organisation, marketing teams, etc. Particularly in the environmental space, there's, if you're working with large organisations that have different divisions, they will all have a different take on this. Particularly different brands, they will all have different marketing teams in there. So getting internal referrals and external referrals from it, and getting that, the reference from one of the sort of absolute best bits of marketing that you can get when you're selling to businesses, particularly at the high end, is to be on the stage in a place where they go, at the Retail Week conference or something like that. If you're on a fringe stage with one of their competitors, talking about collectively the work that you've done around, CSR, or around changing their working practices, to improve their staff retention for carers, whatever it is, if you're able to get on that stage with them, the credibility you get from that is enormous. It's unparalleled. And the interest that you'll get from their competitors in wanting to work with you will be huge. And the part of it, they'll be driven by emotion, less by the pragmatics, just because they don't want their competitors to be doing this without them. So there's a whole load of stuff which then flows from this, if you get it right. Hayley.
I'd just be interested in your comments at the moment, Martin, on the nature of the world we're in right now, because actually I think, we're all on Zoom, for example, today. So actually getting those introductions, meeting the right people, everything has become quite a lot more challenging, perhaps. Some audiences we may have solutions that are opportune right now, but getting to the right person is quite difficult. I'd just be interested in your thoughts.
I'm finding it easier than ever. The only reason is because I don't have to be in the same city as somebody. We don't have to coordinate diaries. All we have to do is find a slot that they're free, and we Zoom. And it's a little bit trickier to build a relationship over Zoom, but it's easier to get into people's diaries. One of the certain areas that you might want to do in your outbound marketing. So you may have been using conferences and that sort of thing. It's one of the sort of classic outbound marketing techniques. Is you'll go to a conference, you'll know who's going to be there. You'll have you'll have done your little Google search. You know what they look like. You're going to bump into them for a coffee. That's the plan. I'm going to bump into these 7 people for coffee, and these 3 people I'm going to try and sit next to them at the next sort of seminar. That's gone. But that's a very narrow part of your marketing, sort of target marketing mix. Usually, particularly if you've got referrals, untapped referrals, now is an ideal time to do that, because people are more accessible through Zoom. It's just about how you then manage that Zoom conversation, and it shouldn't really be any different than in person. Is your experience dramatically different to that, or have you guys? Because I think part of it is that because we think it's going to be harder, we don't do it as much.
Yeah, I think a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is in the local authority space, in the sort of social care and public health side, which obviously right now is extremely focused on keeping people alive, basically, and prevention. We've got quite a lot to add into that agenda, but again, it's just getting to the right people. The ones that we've got to and having conversations with, it really resonates. But in a new field, particularly our work's animal assisted therapy, which is proven in one area but not in others, it's a bit more challenging. Yeah,
the more that you can leverage referrals from the people that you've been able to speak to. So how can you help me get into more people? There's a legitimate questions to ask. So if they've got value from it, just remind them of the value that they've got. That the referral piece, it's really important that referrals should provide value to 3 different people. They should provide value to you because you get to meet the people you want. They should provide value to that person because you're going to give them something, some information, some insights that they really need. And you're going to provide value to the referring party, the person who's actually making the introduction, because if it goes well, they will be thanked by their colleagues. And that's the thing that you've got to get into your head and into their heads, that if you've appreciated speaking to me, who are the other people that I should speak to? Because, I want to make them thank you, almost. That's the sort of, that's the way into this. But the more you can use those conversations that you've actually had to open doors, which you just get on somebody else's agenda, get into their calendar. How do you get into John's calendar? Because I'm really struggling, and I think he would appreciate this just as much as you. Any advice? And just ask those questions. One last thing. If you want to know more about this, and I'm not saying that you must, but if you want to, 13th and 14th of October, a day and a half with coaching for me for the following 30 days to go through the whole process. So develop and refine your sales strategy, and how to identify buyers, or get you the kind of hit list of buyers, how you qualify them, how you use that language around the breaking the ice, getting the initial rapport. We'll be practicing and doing practicals around those conversations. So role plays, etc., practicing language, introducing new language to try and help you work through all of that sales process that I just talked about, and building the confidence that you'll need in order to be able to kind of go in there and be flexible and create solutions for individuals, whether that's you or whether that's for your team, etc. So this is open to you, to your colleagues, if you want to do it. But if you want to do it, let me know quickly, particularly if you want to get in that discount. And if we've got enough people by sort of late September, we'll lock it in and we'll go ahead. So if you want to kind of take this to the next level and really understand and learn this stuff and practice this stuff, and then have coaching support afterwards in terms of, being able to go and try this, come back, this didn't work, that didn't work, this did, etc. What do I need to do? If you want that, or you think your team should have that, just drop me a note, and hopefully I will see you then. All right? Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining me. It's lovely to see you all.